Hello BookTube. Today I have Hero of Two Worlds, the Marquis de Lafayette in the Age of Revolution by Mike Duncan. I've talked about Mike Duncan quite a few times on this channel before, and I'll link to those videos in the description down below. But if you haven't seen those videos or you don't know who Mike Duncan is, his main claim to fame is a history podcaster. He did the epic History of Rome podcast, which does the whole history of Rome from beginning to end. And then when he finished that, he jumped from the ancient world into the modern world to do Revolutions podcasts, which go through and chronicle the famous revolutions of the modern era. I have joked in the past that sometimes I feel like Mike Duncan is making content just for me, because he seems to make podcasts and books on exactly the same topics I myself am interested in. I was a huge ancient history of Rome nerd when I was younger, so the History of Rome podcast was right for me. Mike Duncan did one book on the history of Rome, The Storm Before the Storm, which was based on the generation before the fall of the Republic, from the Gracchi brothers to right before Pompey and Caesar. Exactly the same period of history of Rome that I myself am interested in. Then he went on to do the Revolutions podcast, and I am also fascinated by the modern age of revolutions. And then his book on Lafayette, which is another figure that I have long been interested in and fascinated by. So I don't know what your own experience or history with Lafayette is. I was reading this book the other week, and my coworker had no idea who Lafayette was. This was a fellow American. He's not a history nerd like I am, but there you go. I guess not everybody knows. So just in case, Lafayette is famous in America for being a young French nobleman who came over and volunteered for the American Revolution and became George Washington's aide-de-camp, like George Washington's right-hand man. In America, it's typical that whatever city you live in, there's something named after Lafayette. There'll be a street named Lafayette, or there'll be a school called Lafayette, or a park, or a square. Something in your town is probably named after Lafayette. My own experience is I remember my history teacher in 7th grade talking about Lafayette very briefly. And then I never heard anything about him ever again. And I always wondered, what did he go on to do? Like, the French Revolution happened a few years later. Did Lafayette play a role in the French Revolution? I didn't seriously get into reading about the French Revolution until I was in my mid-20s. And then I discovered that, yes, Lafayette did have a major role in the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution is famous for going through stages, where yesterday's radical becomes today's conservative, as the revolution just gets more and more radical. And sure enough, this happened to Lafayette. At the beginning of the French Revolution, he was on the leading edge of it. And then as the wheel turned, he soon became behind the times and was had a fall from grace as the radicals took power, is the short version. But there was a period there where Lafayette was one of the big figures, or the big figure of the French Revolution for a brief moment in time. Because Mike Duncan covers both the American Revolution and the French Revolution in his podcast, he talks about Lafayette a lot. And it turns out that Lafayette is a major figure in not two, but three major revolutions, because Lafayette also figures prominently in the Revolution of 1830, which Mike Duncan also covers on his podcasts. So he lived a long and interesting life. Anyways, back when I was in my mid-20s and I was developing this interest in Lafayette, I did track down at least one biography of Lafayette. This is actually, it's a story about Lafayette and Washington, kind of tying their stories both together. Title of the book is For Liberty and Glory, Washington and Lafayette in Their Revolutions, or something like that, by James R. Gaines. Hopefully I'm remembering the name right. I've talked about it on this channel before. I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. And Mike Duncan also mentions that book in his bibliography as one of the books that he read on Lafayette that helped him in his own research. Okay, so I think that's enough background. Actually, that's not enough background. A little bit more background. Mike Duncan published this book, I believe, in 2021. I did not read it at the time for a few reasons. One is I was still working my way through Revolution's podcast. I wanted to finish the whole podcast before I did this book because they cover similar ground, and I didn't want to confuse them in my head. I wanted to do first one and then the other. The second reason is I was in Vietnam until last year. And so it was just very difficult to track down this book. But now that I'm back in the US, I got this book out of my local library and have read it. And now here I am with my review. I suspect the majority of readers of this book are people who came over because they like Mike Duncan's content on his podcasts. I'm sure a few people pick this book up at random at bookstores in the library, but certainly most people who seek this book out must be people who know Mike Duncan's reputation because of his podcast. Definitely that was my story. So coming from being a fan of Mike Duncan's podcast, I was expecting this to be a little bit more light and breezy than it actually is. It's surprisingly information dense. So you're reading through there, and there are a lot of facts about Lafayette crammed onto each page in a way that's both good and bad. When I first started this book, I was pleasantly surprised with just how much new information I was being flooded by. Because I thought, okay, I already know Lafayette's story basically. I've already listened to Mike Duncan recount a lot of the stuff on his Revolutions podcast. I hope there's going to be stuff in this book to justify my time. And yeah, there is, if you're looking for new content on Lafayette, there is a lot of stuff in here. So you are getting bang for your buck. The negative part of that maybe is that it's a book that requires very close attention, and it can be, at least in my opinion, somewhat exhausting to read, or at least more exhausting than I thought it was going to be. To pay close attention, I was absorbing a lot of information in a short amount of time, needed to kind of periodically set the book aside and just kind of reflect on what I was learning and consolidate it. It made it very hard, at least for me, to kind of speed through it. Mike Duncan is a good writer. Podcasting is a form of writing in the sense that he has to script the episodes before he records them. So he's got a lot of practice by now with his storytelling, and this is his second book, not even counting his podcasts. So the narration style is solid, in my opinion. There are major events in Lafayette's life. So there's the revolutions, right? There's the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the Revolution of 1830. In between those major set pieces, there's just biographical details. And there's a tendency for this book to, at times, just become a list of all the stuff that Lafayette did, or all the things Lafayette was involved in. I'm thinking particularly the section between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, the kind of lull before the big storm, where we get a lot of details about Lafayette's life, what he was up to, what he was doing, the different societies he was involved in, his family life, etc. That didn't have as much strong narrative momentum to it as the major set pieces did, in my opinion. But then once we get back to the French Revolution, then it picks right back up again. The focus of this book is squarely on Lafayette. So if you're looking for something that will take you through all the major stages of the French Revolution, it's there in the background, but it's mostly there only insofar as it impacts Lafayette. You'll have to go to another book to get the full history of the French Revolution, as you would expect. One of the things that Mike Duncan mentions somewhere in his podcast when he's promoting this book, something that he's especially proud of, is the last third of the book. So he says apparently a lot of books on Lafayette either end or mostly end after his release from the Austrian prison in, I think, 1797, after the French Revolution stage was done. But in fact, Lafayette was actually involved in a lot of the politics of the day, all the way up into 1830. Now, 1830, of course, he's involved in that. But he's involved in a lot of little ways. He had minor government positions. He was elected as a deputy in this or that chamber. He had his fingers in the pot in a lot of the political stuff between the French Revolution and the Revolution of 1830. And that's the whole last third of the book, which Mike Duncan does a good job of recounting, and there's a lot of fascinating stuff in here. One of the things I wondered a bit when I first heard that Mike Duncan was writing this book, and he announced it on his podcast at the time, is there are already a lot of biographies of Lafayette out there already. What is Mike Duncan adding that hasn't been done in a previous biography? And Mike Duncan acknowledges at the end of his book, in the bibliographic notes section, that he is making use of a lot of these previously published biographies. Exactly what Mike Duncan is adding here, I don't know. But possibly he's adding nothing other than just a fresh retelling by a skilled storyteller. I don't know. If you listen to his podcast, you know that he took a lot of time off to research it. He even went to France to dig around in the archives in France and learned French for the purposes of writing this book. So I bring that up just really to say I don't know, I guess. Maybe somebody else out there does. But after all that research that Mike Duncan put into this book, what, in terms of new information, does he bring to the table that the other biographies didn't bring? I don't know. So I'll just leave that question hanging there. And I also, like I said at the beginning of this video, I've only read one biography of Lafayette previously, so I'm not the person to do the authoritative what's the best biography of Lafayette review. But I can say that I enjoyed this. What else do I want to say about this book? It's one, Mike Duncan has mentioned in his podcasts that there are different views on Lafayette. I think in one episode of this podcast, he mentions that the French and American view of Lafayette is interesting in how different they are. So Americans regard Lafayette as a hero. Mike Duncan said the French tend to regard Lafayette as a bit of a buffoon, in that Lafayette was living in this dream world where he thought everybody loved him. He was going to win the French Revolution and be everybody's hero. And then he was so out of touch with reality that when the radicals gained control, he was just completely caught off guard. I've noticed that a little bit myself in just some of the different books I've read on the French Revolution, not even by French people themselves, but just books on the French Revolution by English authors. The portrayal of Lafayette is often mixed. You get the sense that he was, if not a buffoon or a conservative out of touch with the times, at least politically naive. But Mike Duncan has said on his podcast that he's a big Lafayette admirer, and that comes through in this book. He really does like Lafayette, admire Lafayette's enthusiasm, energy, and idealism. That being said, he does bring up Lafayette's faults. So there's what seems to me, and again, I'm not an expert on the Lafayette historiography, but it seems to me to be a very balanced view of Lafayette's both good qualities and also his shortcomings. He was incredibly vain. This comes through very clearly in the book. I mean, he was idealistic. He wanted to be on the side of the angels. He wanted to fight for liberty and equality and freedom. But he also, especially in his younger days, desperately wanted to be the hero, wanted to get all the glory. And so the idealism is sometimes in conflict with his ego insofar as there are moments when his desire to be the hero gets a little bit in the way of the success of the greater cause. Also, as Mike Duncan brings up, Lafayette was, for most of his life, a very vocal and strong abolitionist, and yet there are times that he dropped the ball on advancing the cause of abolition for one reason or another. There's an interesting thread about his failed experiment to free the slaves in a property he bought on a Caribbean island that really runs through almost the whole book, or at least the whole second half of it. It's such a great idea, but Lafayette, for one reason or other, just keeps screwing up the project. Also, Lafayette was incredibly politically naive, either because of political naivety or overwhelming idealism, unrealistic idealism, did not form the necessary relationships and coalitions that he would have needed to secure victory for his vision of politics. It's something that was his undoing in the French Revolution, one of his undoings, and something which backfired on him in the aftermath of the Revolution of 1830. So that portrait of Lafayette is interesting to read. Very, very, very human. He definitely had his faults. But mixed in with that, there is remarkably consistent idealism, dedication to a particular set of political beliefs which didn't seem to have changed much from 1776 all the way to 1830, even though the world around Lafayette changed a lot. I guess it's not always a good thing to not change with the times. But in this particular instance, I think Lafayette's idealism was mostly admirable. Where maybe you could criticize him a little bit is even by 1830, he was still supporting a constitutional monarchy instead of an outright republic. Although, as the book makes clear, there were somewhat practical reasons for doing that. He didn't think that the majority of the French people were ready for an outright republic in 1830. But that support for constitutional monarchy had been his same position in 1789. So the consistent beliefs there. Lafayette was not a great philosopher. He was intelligent and he read widely, but there were greater minds than his on the philosophical question. But his ideas about the purposes of government are interesting to read in this day and age. So one of the things I didn't know, or if I knew it I forgot before reading this book, was that Lafayette drafted the first draft of the Rights of Man. Now, as Mike Duncan makes clear, he didn't actually end up writing what became known as the Rights of Man from the French Revolution, but he had the first draft of it, and Mike Duncan goes through that draft. And one of the things that struck me is Lafayette wrote that the purpose of government is to ensure the common good. It just struck me in this day and age when we become so used to maybe politicians taking advantage of government for political advantage or to advance their own family or business interests or to score political points. That is just a reminder, even in these cynical times, that the purpose of government is to advance the common good. Whenever we start straying from that ideal, it means that it's time to course correct and remember that we need to focus on making the purpose of government being for the common good. So that's a little bit of a random point, but that's something that resonated with me as I was reading through this book and seeing how that idealism from 200 years ago still is sadly relevant. Relevant in the sense that we need to remember it now because it's something that we've forgotten, I think. There are all sorts of interesting points in this book. Lafayette's relationship with King Louis and Marie Antoinette, Lafayette's relationship with Napoleon, Lafayette's ongoing relationship with George Washington, Lafayette's return to America in the 1820s. Like I said, there's a lot of interesting stuff in here, but yeah, you'll have to read the book for yourself. So check this one out. If you're a history nerd, there is a lot in here to hold your interest. It's a high recommend for me, and let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Thank you, BookTube.